On April 1st, 2026, a rocket carrying 4 astronauts lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, punched through the atmosphere, and sent human beings farther from Earth than anyone has traveled in over half a century. The last time humans left low Earth orbit, Richard Nixon was president, gas cost 55 cents, and the internet did not exist. But Artemis 2 was not just a nostalgia trip. It was the opening move in a plan that NASA had just torn apart and rebuilt from scratch, a plan that now involves a permanent base on the lunar surface, 2 billionaire-backed moon landers in a literal space race, a canceled space station, and a road that leads eventually to the red surface of Mars. And the whole thing has already cost over $100 billion. This is the complete Artemis roadmap, from the first test flight to the Martian horizon. Before any humans climbed aboard, NASA needed to prove the hardware actually worked. That was Artemis worse. In November 2022, the Space Launch System rocket launched an uncrewed Orion spacecraft on a 25-day trip around the moon and back. Orion traveled 1.4 million miles total and reached a distance of 268,563 miles from Earth. That made it the farthest any human-rated spacecraft had ever flown. The European service module built by Airbus in Bremen, Germany, performed even better than expected, generating 20% more power while using 25% less fuel. 10 small CubeSat satellites were deployed along the way. During re-entry, the capsule screamed into Earth's atmosphere at around 25,000 miles per hour, enduring temperatures roughly half as hot as the surface of the Sun. It used a brand new technique called skip re-entry, where the capsule literally bounces off the upper atmosphere like a stone skipping across a pond, bleeding off speed before plunging down for splashdown. On paper, Artemis Y was a massive success. But when engineers cracked open the spacecraft and started inspecting it, they found something alarming. The heat shield had cracked. In over 100 locations, chunks of the Avcoat ablative material had broken off in ways nobody predicted. During that skip re-entry, heat had gotten trapped inside the shield material, built up pressure, and blown pieces away. If astronauts had been inside during that re-entry, the consequences could have been catastrophic. That one discovery delayed the entire Artemis program by more than a year and forced NASA to completely redesign the re-entry trajectory for every future crewed mission. Which brings us to April 2026 and the mission happening right now. Artemis 2 is carrying 4 astronauts on a 10-day flyby around the moon. No landing, just loop around and come home. But what sounds simple on paper is anything but. The crew is making history in about 4 different ways simultaneously. Commander Reed Wiseman is a Navy test pilot who became the oldest person to travel to the moon's vicinity at age 50. He is also a single father raising 2 daughters after losing his wife Carol to cancer in 2020. Pilot Victor Glover, a Navy captain, just became the first person of color on a lunar mission. Mission specialist Christina Koch holds the record for the longest single space flight by a woman at 328 days aboard the International Space Station, and she is now the first woman ever assigned to a moon-bound crew. And then there is Jeremy Hansen, a Canadian Air Force colonel making his very first space flight. Not to low Earth orbit, not to the space station. His first trip to space is to the moon. He is also the first non-American to ever fly on a lunar mission. On April 6th, the crew swung around the far side of the moon and experienced a 57-minute solar eclipse, saw the lunar far side with their own eyes, and broke Apollo 13's distance record by roughly 4,100 miles. During the flyby, Hansen's voice cracked on the radio as he proposed naming a newly spotted bright crater Carol after Wiseman's late wife. All 4 crew members were visibly emotional on camera. It instantly became the defining moment of the mission. To deal with that heat shield problem from Artemis bursts, NASA changed the re-entry plan. Instead of the skip re-entry, Artemis II will come in on a steeper, more direct path. That means higher deceleration forces on the crew, but much safer thermal performance on the shield. Re-entry is steeper and splashdown is expected April 10th off the coast of San Diego. Just 5 weeks before Artemis II launched, NASA's new administrator dropped a bombshell that rewrote the entire program. Jared Isaacman took over NASA in late 2025, and he is not your typical administrator. He is a billionaire who founded a payment processing company called Shift4, dropped out of high school at 16, commanded the first all-civilian orbital mission Inspiration 4, and conducted the first private spacewalk during the Polaris Dawn mission in 2024. The Senate confirmed him by a vote of 67-30. On February 27, 2026, Isaacman announced a sweeping overhaul of the Artemis architecture. The biggest change was to Artemis III, which had been slated to be the triumphant return of humans to the lunar surface. Instead, it was demoted. It is no longer a moon landing. Instead, Artemis III is now a low Earth orbit test mission where astronauts will practice docking with the SpaceX Starship lander and the Blue Origin Blue Moon lander, and will test the new Axiom spacesuit in space for the first time. The reason was simple: safety. NASA safety advisors warned that the original Artemis III was trying to do too many brand new things at once. Starship had not demonstrated orbital refueling. The new spacesuit was still in development. Stacking that many untested technologies into a single mission with humans aboard was too risky. Isaacman called it a course correction to get back to the step-by-step approach that actually made Apollo work. So now Artemis IV becomes the first crewed lunar landing since 1972, targeting early 2028. 2 of the 4 astronauts will descend to the lunar South Pole for about a week of surface exploration, collecting samples and testing equipment near permanently shadowed craters where scientists believe water ice might be hiding. Artemis V follows in late 2028 with a second landing using the Blue Origin Blue Moon lander under a $3.4 billion contract, along with the first crewed lunar rover since Apollo 17. But Isaacman wasn't done. On March 24th, he dropped an even bigger announcement. The Lunar Gateway, a small space station that was supposed to orbit the moon as a staging point for landings, was canceled. Just like that. Gone. This was a $5.3 billion international project involving NASA, the European Space Agency, Japan, Canada, and the United Arab Emirates. The Halo module was already built by Thales Alenia Space in Italy. Canada had spent over $2 billion developing a next-generation robotic arm called Canadarm3. The United Arab Emirates was building an airlock. Isaacman determined Gateway was not necessary for lunar landings, and would not even be ready until 2030. Instead, he announced a 3-phase plan to build a permanent base directly on the moon's surface, with an estimated price tag of $20 to $30 billion. Phase 1 runs through 2028, and focuses on establishing reliable access to the moon with up to 30 robotic lander deliveries and achieving the first crewed landing. Phase 2 stretches from 2029 to 2032 with the goal of semi-permanent infrastructure, Japan's pressurized rover built with Toyota, crewed landings twice per year, and continuous human presence comparable to the International Space Station by 2032. Phase 3, from 2033 to 2036, brings permanent habitats built by Italy, nuclear and solar power systems, lunar GPS, and operations to extract oxygen and hydrogen directly from moon rock and ice. That last part is critical, because it connects directly to Mars. The whole point of going back to the moon is not just flags and footprints. NASA's framework treats the lunar surface as a proving ground for Mars. Every major technology you would need for a 500-day round trip to the red planet can be tested first in the moon's backyard, just 3 days from home instead of 9 months away. Take oxygen production. On Mars, the Perseverance rover carried an experiment called MOXIE that successfully pulled oxygen out of the thin Martian carbon dioxide atmosphere. It produced 122 grams of oxygen across 16 runs at over 98% purity. That is a proof of concept. A human scale system on Mars would need to generate hundreds of times that amount, roughly 25 metric tons, just to fuel the rocket home. Testing that kind of extraction technology on the moon first, using lunar ice, is far safer than debugging it on Mars. Then there is radiation. A Mars round trip exposes astronauts to radiation levels roughly 700 times higher than what they would experience on Earth's surface. Here is the scary part. Galactic cosmic rays are so energetic that traditional shielding can actually make matters worse by creating secondary particles. Artemis 1 flew an experiment with two mannequins, one wearing a radiation vest and one without, carrying 5,600 sensors. Artemis 2 is testing artificial intelligence-powered solar radiation forecasting in real time. Solving this problem is existential for any Mars mission. And propulsion. Getting to Mars faster means less radiation exposure and fewer supplies needed. Nuclear thermal propulsion could potentially cut the transit time from 7 to 9 months down to 4 to 5 months. NASA and DARPA had a joint program called DRACO working on this, but it got effectively canceled in the budget. The replacement is called Space Reactor 1 Freedom, which will actually use the repurposed power module from the canceled Gateway station to demonstrate a nuclear fission reactor in space. Sometimes canceled hardware finds a second life. NASA is also running CHAPEA, a program where volunteers live inside a 3D printed simulated Mars habitat in Houston for an entire year. The second crew started in October 2025. They are studying everything from bone density loss to psychological stress to food production. Because the engineering challenges of Mars are only half the problem. The human body itself might be the biggest obstacle. Now, none of this is cheap, and the politics around Artemis are absolutely wild. The program has cost an estimated $93 to $107 billion through 2026, depending on how you count it. Each SLS rocket launch costs about $4.1 billion. For context, that is roughly 3 times what a Saturn V cost in today's dollars. The NASA Inspector General has flatly said that at these cost levels, the SLS program is unsustainable. But here's the twist. Congress, not NASA, mandated the construction of SLS back in 2010, largely to preserve Space Shuttle-era jobs. The rocket's prime contractors have suppliers in all 50 states. Critics have nicknamed it the Senate Launch System. The current White House has twice proposed killing SLS and Orion after the next few flights. And twice, Congress has rejected those cuts with overwhelming bipartisan votes. The House voted 397 to 28 to keep funding it. The Senate went 82 to 15. They even added $10 billion to NASA's budget through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Meanwhile, SpaceX's Starship, which is projected to cost around $100 million per launch if it becomes fully reusable, has spent roughly $3 billion in total development. SLS development alone cost $23.8 billion. That contrast is hard to ignore, and it's creating real tension about the future of how NASA gets to space. 61 countries have now signed the Artemis Accords, a set of principles for peaceful lunar exploration that covers everything from data sharing to resource extraction to not messing with other people's landing sites. Russia refused to sign, calling the Accords a United States power grab. China compared them to colonial-era land enclosures. Russia and China are instead building their own competing international lunar research station with 13 partner nations. So we're watching 2 rival moon blocks form in real time. One led by the United States with 61 partners, one led by China and Russia. The new space race isn't just about science, it's geopolitics playing out on the lunar surface. Right now, 4 humans are hurtling back toward Earth inside a capsule the size of a large SUV, about to test a heat shield that already failed once before. If they splash down safely on April 10th, it validates the entire system that's supposed to carry people back to the moon's surface in 2028, sustain a permanent base by 2032, and eventually send humans to Mars. That timeline is aggressive. SpaceX still hasn't demonstrated orbital refueling. Blue Origin hasn't flown its moonlander yet. The spacesuits aren't flight certified. The budget faces annual political fights. International partners are scrambling to adjust after the Gateway cancellation. But the foundational work is happening. Every sensor on Artemis 2 is generating data. Every gram of oxygen that Moxie produced on Mars proved the concept. Every day those CHAPEA volunteers spend in their simulated habitat reveals something new about keeping humans alive far from home. We went to the moon 50 years ago and then just stopped. For half a century, the farthest thing from Earth with a heartbeat was the International Space Station, orbiting just 250 miles up. That's like driving from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. The moon is 1,000 times farther. Mars is 1,000 times farther than that. Artemis is the bridge. Whether we cross it on schedule, over budget, or through some path nobody's predicted yet, the road from the moon to Mars has officially reopened. If you're into space and science content, hit subscribe. We cover the biggest stories in exploration every week.